In the midst of the 20th century, when nations competed not only in politics but also in science and technology, a defining moment emerged that would forever change humanity's perception of what was possible. The United States of America, driven by ambition, national pride, and a thirst for exploration, set out to accomplish something that had once existed only in the dreams of writers and visionaries, landing a man on the moon. This story began long before July 20, 1969, with a spark ignited by curiosity and intensified by rivalry during the Cold War. The world had barely begun to grasp the power of rockets when, in 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite. That tiny metal sphere orbiting Earth shocked the United States and marked the dawn of the space age. The event not only symbolized Soviet technological superiority but also awakened a sense of urgency in the American government, military, and scientific communities. The race to space had begun, and the challenge was clear: America needed to catch up and surpass its rival. In response, the United States founded NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, in 1958. The goal was no longer just exploration, it was about prestige, security, and global leadership. The space race became a central front of the Cold War, a peaceful yet intense battle fought with science and courage rather than weapons. The American people, inspired by the promise of adventure, rallied behind this new frontier. In 1961, newly elected President John F. Kennedy gave a speech that would define an era. Standing before Congress, he declared that the United States would commit itself to landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth before the decade was out. His words electrified the nation. At that time, the idea seemed almost impossible. NASA had barely managed to send a human into suborbital space, yet Kennedy's challenge transformed that impossibility into a national mission. Behind the scenes, thousands of engineers, scientists, and mathematicians went to work. They faced unimaginable obstacles: how to build rockets powerful enough to escape Earth's gravity, how to keep astronauts alive in the vacuum of space, and how to land safely on a celestial body no human had ever touched. Each question led to years of research, testing, and innovation. Programs like Mercury and Gemini served as stepping stones toward the moon. Mercury proved that humans could survive in space, and Gemini tested the techniques of spacewalking and docking. Each success built confidence, but each failure reminded NASA of the enormous risks ahead. As the 1960s progressed, America made steady progress. The Saturn V rocket, designed under the leadership of German engineer Wernher von Braun, became the most powerful machine ever built. Standing over 360 feet tall, it could lift more than 100 tons into orbit and propel astronauts toward the moon. Every bolt, every wire, every circuit. As Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin began their exploration of the lunar surface, the weight of what they were doing became clear not only to them but to billions watching back on Earth. Their voices, carried through static and distance, reached living rooms, classrooms, and radios across the globe. People from every nation, regardless of language or belief, were united in that singular moment, witnessing humankind walk on another world. The moon, once a symbol of mystery and inspiration for poets and dreamers, was now a tangible place touched by human hands. The astronauts' movements were slow and deliberate as they adjusted to the moon's weak gravity, which was about 1/6 of Earth's. Every step kicked up fine gray dust that floated and settled slowly back onto the ground. The horizon seemed closer because of the moon's smaller size, and the black sky above them was scattered with stars that shone more brilliantly than ever seen from Earth. The first tasks were scientific and symbolic. They collected samples of lunar rock and soil, set up experiments to measure solar wind, seismic activity, and reflectors that would later allow lasers from Earth to measure the moon's distance precisely. They also planted the American flag, though it was not a claim of ownership but rather a tribute to human achievement. The flag appeared to wave slightly, not from wind, but from the movement of the metal rod that held it upright. They placed a plaque on the landing module that read, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon, July 1969 AD. We came in peace for all mankind." These words were chosen carefully to express that this was not an act of conquest but one of unity and exploration. Inside their suits, Armstrong and Aldrin sweated and breathed carefully. The environment was harsh, temperatures could vary drastically, and the vacuum meant a single tear or malfunction could be fatal. Yet they worked calmly, their training guiding every motion. They spoke with Mission Control in Houston, which monitored every heartbeat and every word. On Earth, people were mesmerized by the live broadcast, despite its grainy black and white images. Some wept, others cheered, and some simply sat in awe, realizing that for the first time, humanity had truly left its home world. After about 2.5 hours outside the lunar module, Armstrong and Aldrin prepared to return inside. They had collected around 47 pounds of rock and soil samples, taken photographs, and completed all planned experiments. The final act before re-entering the Eagle was to leave behind mementos, patches honoring the Apollo 1 astronauts who had died, and medals for Soviet cosmonauts Yuri Gagarin and Vladimir Komarov, symbolizing the shared human journey of exploration. Once back inside, they rested briefly, removing their helmets and gloves. The cramped cabin was filled with dust that had clung to their suits, and it gave off a distinct, burnt smell. Despite the fatigue, When the Apollo 11 astronauts finally stepped out of quarantine and rejoined the world, they were greeted not just as American heroes, but as representatives of the entire human race. The moon landing had transcended borders, ideologies, and politics. It was not only a victory for science and technology but a profound statement about humanity's capacity to dream, persevere, and achieve the impossible. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins were honored with parades across the United States and later embarked on a world tour, visiting over 20 nations. Everywhere they went, crowds gathered to see the men who had touched another world. In cities from Tokyo to London to Karachi, people cheered them not as Americans but as pioneers of humankind. For a brief and shining moment, the world was united by a shared sense of wonder. Back in the United States, the success of Apollo 11 was celebrated as the culmination of a decade-long national effort. The 1960s had been a turbulent era filled with political unrest, civil rights struggles, and the Vietnam War. The moon landing offered a rare moment of optimism, a collective triumph that reminded Americans of what they could accomplish together. It validated the vision of President Kennedy, who had boldly declared that America would reach the moon not because it is easy, but because it is hard. That hard task had been achieved, and the success of Apollo 11 restored faith in progress and innovation. The mission also boosted interest in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, inspiring a generation of young people to become scientists, astronauts, and engineers. Scientifically, the mission yielded invaluable data. The lunar rocks and soil samples brought back were studied by scientists across the world. They revealed the moon's geological history, showing that it was about 4.5 billion years old and had formed from debris after a massive collision between Earth and another celestial body. Instruments left on the surface continued sending data back to Earth, providing insights into the moon's composition, gravity, and seismic activity. The reflectors installed by the astronauts allowed scientists to measure the distance between Earth and the moon with unprecedented precision, and they continue to do so to this day. Beyond the science, the mission's true gift was perspective. From space, Earth looked fragile and unified, a small oasis of life surrounded by the vast emptiness of the cosmos. The Earthrise photograph from Apollo 8 and the later Blue Marble image became symbols of environmental awareness and global unity. The Apollo program continued after Apollo 11, with missions 12 through 17 exploring different regions of the moon, conducting experiments, and gathering more data. Each mission built on the success of the last, proving that space exploration could be both safe and scientifically fruitful. However, as the 1970s began, public interest began to fade. What had once seemed